Well, good evening. I do want to start off by once again thanking the congregation, thanking the elders for the opportunity to be with you. Thank Brother Antoine for coming out to Cincinnati, and I got to meet him. And so certainly thankful for that relationship and the opportunity to be with you and your family. Just thank you all for the wonderful breakfasts and the dinners. I'm so full. The kindness of this group is so obvious. The love that you have for one another, the love that you have shown to Jamie and myself. We just thank you so much for that. We ask that you will continue to remember us in your prayers as we go back to Cincinnati tomorrow and continue to do the work there. And how wonderful it is to know that I will certainly see you again. Whether it's here, I would love that, in Tucson. This is a beautiful place. But far more importantly, for eternity. And certainly appreciate that. I do ask you to laugh at Shannon's jokes. He needs the confidence. Bless his heart. But I do want to thank the Boyds. The Boyds have opened up their home to us. Beautiful, beautiful place. And as you all know them, they're as nice of people as they come. And we're just so thankful to get to know them and for their hospitality to us. And you certainly are blessed with a lot of good people here. And I'm sorry I didn't get to spend time with everyone. But just know I am praying for you always. And just so wonderful and encouraged to meet such a fine group of people worshiping our God. And so thank you very, very much. We're not going to have time to get into all the lessons that I would love to talk to you about Samuel. We're not going to talk about how he wanted to pin David to the wall a couple of times, even though David was just helping him. We're not going to talk about how the people were singing the praises to David, but all David was doing was bringing glory to God and then helping Saul get rid of the enemy. We're not going to talk about how Saul changed his perspective of who the enemy was. He changes it from the Philistines and begins to call David his enemy. We're not going to get into all the other pieces of the story of Saul that ends in a tragic way. It ends with his death. It ends with his son's death, as we had said. But Saul's story does not end there. David actually is going to take care of one of Jonathan's sons going forward. And so there's a lot of the pieces that I encourage you to study about him. And as I do agree with Shannon said, it's way too often that I see myself in Saul. But the amazing thing about the story of Saul and the story that we all live is that we still have the choice to make. We have the choice of whether or not we're going to continue to go down the road as Saul did, or if we're going to choose to follow God. And so you come to 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter. Obviously, the story we left off talking about this morning. But this morning we talked about Eliab. Tonight, I want to look at the giant issue a little bit more. And tonight's is really more of a conclusion sermon of the things that we've talked about this week. And so as we get into this, just keep that in mind. There are just so many pieces of this that I would just love to share. But I certainly beg you to go and to study those things. When you think about the challenges of life, we talked about this morning how Goliath would come out every single day, and just yell. And we understand that we all have challenges. We all do. I've been in situations where people seemingly will skip into the church building, never tell you about their issues, and the next thing you know, they're standing, talking to you, crying, because of something that's happened in their marriage or something that's happened in their life that you certainly or we could have certainly helped them a long time ago through. We tend to like to hold things on to ourselves. I can take care of it. So we talked about the other day when it comes to God, and there's this weird view that a lot of people have that what I'm going through is too small for God. All of our issues are too small compared to God. But His love for you is greater than anything that you go through. And He wants to help you through those things that you go through. And so I beg you to make sure that you're making the most of the most wonderful tool that we have of prayer. Talking to our God. pouring out your hearts to him, as we talked about in the beginning about Hannah. Talk to him. We talked this morning about how they were willing to fight together as the group. You see in verse 2, they were ready to go. But when it came down to it, not one of them was willing to go out and fight alone. My brothers and sisters, we fight alone too often. Many times we take God out of the picture, and we certainly take one another out of the picture. It's encouraging. Hopefully it's not an issue here, and I pray that it continues not to be. But if it is, lean on one another. Lean on one another. Understand there's people now in Cincinnati that will be praying for you and would love to help you. Please make sure that you're looking out for one another and helping, even when, as we discussed this morning, when the burden is non-stop, as verse 16 says. Every single day, they're just non-stop. And you can continue in fear, and it can be non-stop. It can be overwhelming. And the amazing thing about the story of David is that David was seeing the exact same thing everybody else was seeing. But there was a difference with David. And that's what we're going to focus on a little bit this evening. We're told in 1 Peter, the 5th chapter, verses 6 through 8, that you need to pray. You need to cast your burdens upon him. Why? Because he cares for you. He cares for you. That's a struggle that a lot of folks have. Over in John, the 5th chapter, as we lay the foundation of this lesson, I want to introduce you to a story certainly I'm sure you've heard. Jesus is going to heal this man at Bethesda. The guy was trying to get into the water just like everybody else that was there trying to get into water. And Jesus asked him a question, and I don't know specifically as to why he asked this question. I don't know if this is the first time he asked this question. We're not told. Did he ask other people this exact question? But in verse 6, he asks the question of the man, do you wish to get well? And it's always struck me that question. Because certainly Jesus is saying, I can heal you. Do you wish to get well? But he had been sick for 38 years. There are people that would have answered that question by saying, no, I don't want to get well. I define myself by what I've had for 38 years, the life that I live. This man's life in John the 5th chapter was absolutely 100% going to change after that day. He was not going to have to go back and sit at the pool of Bethesda. That's what he has done for years. His life changed. Not everybody wants that. And that's unfortunate. So as we've been talking this week, and I hope that you understand, I want you to begin, if you haven't already, to define yourself as the child of the King that you are. You are the child of the living God. He offers you something that nobody else can offer you, which is that you can get spiritually well, that you can be healed by the great God, the only one that's able to do it. Our God. That's the choice that we have. So as we begin tonight, I want you to understand we all have these challenges. There's all the things that we can struggle with and go through. But when you go back to 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter, David is dealing with the same thing. He sees the size of the guy just like his brother. He hears him. But David's reaction is vastly different. Where's old Saul? He's hiding. He's still behind baggage. Now he's in a tent. He's doing everything he possibly can not to be in the front of the line. So now you go back to David. What I want to notice about David is he is absolutely God-focused. If you go back to 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter, picking up in verse 26, we talked about this morning. He asked what is going to happen to him. What are we going to do if I to the person that's going to get these things? David is given the answer. We have the little disagreement with his brother. And then all of a sudden you have David going up and talking before Saul. And we talked about this morning, this is weird from Saul's perspective. But tonight I want to look at it from David's perspective. Verse 31, he says, when the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and he sent for him. Now think about this. Saul is surrounded by soldiers. right? This guy with cheese has come up, and he's talking about this uncircumcised Philistine. I'll take him on. And they go and tell Saul, and Saul actually listens. What a great idea. Let's bring that guy in here. He'll fight him? Perfect. It's so weird from Saul's perspective. So he brings him in, and he's going to listen to what he has to say. In verse 33, start in verse 32 rather, David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Now Saul has a good answer here in verse 33. You're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. Now listen to what David says. David said to Saul, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by the beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God." Verse 37. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistines." And Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." What's different about what David and Saul said? Saul should have said what David said. Saul should have seen in his life what God has done for him, and he never saw it. He was out looking for donkeys and became king. He's hiding in baggage, and God says, "He's hiding behind the baggage." And they go get him. He's seen this time and time and time again. He's done things. He's killed people in the name of the Lord. God sent him out, and he won. There were victories. But this guy never learned from him. Never. David killed a lion. David killed a bear. And he says, "I don't care how big this champion is. God is going to beat him. God is going to take care of him." David understood or had confidence because of his God. I want you to think about that. It's not confidence in anything else. You can have confidence in other things, if you would like. But the confidence that truly matters is the confidence that we have in Jesus Christ. We see this here. See, but the problem is we don't always see what God does for us. And that's the struggle as we go forward when you talk about David and Saul in particular. He just never saw it. David saw God working in his life. He saw it. Do you? When you look back in your life, do you see God in your life? Do you see that he's helped you through things? Do you see the things that you've prayed for and he's answered those prayers? Maybe not in the way that you wanted, but he's answered your prayers. Do we see what he does for us? We are so blessed. We talked about this Friday night. We are so blessed that we take them so much for granted. If we counted our many blessings, I would not have preached one sermon. We'd still be counting. It is amazing how blessed we are. Even in Ephesians, the first chapter, when he talks about the spiritual blessings, and he doesn't list them all, it's amazing. I beg you to count your blessings, because we're good at counting the consequence or the circumstances we find ourselves in or the struggles that we go through. If you have 100 people tell you, or if you have 100 people tell you something about your sermon, let's use my sermon as an example. 99 said you did a good job, 1 said you didn't. Who are you going to think about? I'll think about the 99. You can think of the 1. We'll think about the 1. We focus on the 1. Why? Why do we do that? Because it's simple to do. Why do we get caught in traffic? A lot of times because people in front are looking at something. And then you just slow down. We want to see these things. And it's so easy to see those types of things. What I'm suggesting we need to do as God's children, as David does here, is that we need to see God working in our lives. I think it's fascinating to me in Lamentations, the 3rd chapter, Jeremiah is seeing some horrible, horrible things. Babylon is coming in. Babylon's going to destroy Jerusalem. Jeremiah is being treated horribly by the brothers, his family, the other people that are there. They're not listening to what he says. And so Jeremiah, known as the weeping prophet, has reason to weep. And I want you to notice in Lamentations 3 what he says here. In verse 19 beginning, he says, "Remember my affliction and my wandering, the wormwood and bitterness. Surely my soul remembers and is bowed down within me. This I recall to mind, therefore I have hope. The Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." You know, it's an amazing thing when you really stop and see what God does in your life. My grandfather, he was sick. He had a lung disease at the end of his life. And he ended up in the hospital, and I was praying, God, please just take him. Just take him. And he got out of the hospital, and he lived another year, which was amazing. And he went back into the hospital, and I was, God, please heal him. Heal him. And he died. He healed him the best way God possibly could have. But it took me a while to understand that. He was fully healed now. He went home. See, a lot of times, it's the perspective that we have on these things. Jesus Christ prays that this will be taken away from me. And how is it answered? Let me send you angels. They'll comfort you. A lot of times, it's us. You know, Jesus will talk about that people, even your parents aren't going to give you, if you ask for a piece of bread, they're going to give you a stone. Right? That's not nice. But the amazing thing for us is a lot of times we ask for the stone. We don't even realize it's not bread. We struggle with our end of things. And God says, that's not what you need. You may not understand it, but you will. We need to make sure that we have full trust in God and remember what he has done. Jeremiah is in the midst of horrible things at this point. And he says, you know what? I recall to mind, therefore I have hope. I remember what you have done. Your loving kindnesses are new every single day. Your compassion is absolutely there, even though I'm going through the midst of horrible things. We need to remember what God has done for us. Over in Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, the other thing we need to remember as we go out into the world, and we talked about this a little bit this morning, one of the things that happens after you've obeyed the gospel and you have that zeal, that excitement, and what happens to it? For some, keep going. For others, kind of back off a little bit. You got to work on it, and you got to keep growing, and you got to keep building that zeal and that faith. But one of the things that sometimes happens is you begin to look at other people and see that they struggle with something. And what is the big deal? Why is this so difficult for you? And sometimes it's because we forget what we used to be. And in Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, verse 1, he says, you are dead in your trespasses and sins. You are dead in your trespasses and sins. You skip down, and all this is important, but you skip down to verse 11. Therefore remember that formerly you, the Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by the so-called circumcision, which is performed in the flesh by human hands. Remember that you were at that time separate from Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, the strangers, the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. You better remember, Gentiles, what you were, he said. You make that application to us. What were we? We were sinners. We were enemies of the Almighty God. We were caught in things that we shouldn't have been doing, that God would view to be evil. And so when we see other people trying to fill that void that only God can fill in their hearts with various things of addictions or various things that are out in the world, why are we to be surprised by that? The only thing that can fill it is God. But when you see somebody struggling with those things, have compassion on them. Have kindness. Understand that you have the answer that can help them, obviously. But there are a lot of things in this world that people view to be of benefit that are not. One of the things that, again, we talked about that a little bit this morning, that can happen so quickly, is that you forget when you talk to people that you're talking to somebody who needs to hear the truth but they need to hear it with compassion. We are good at standing out. There's a guy out by West Mason where I preach. He'll stand out on the corner and he has a sign that says, "You're speeding to heaven." Or, excuse me, he said, "You're speeding your way to hell." I wish it said heaven. "You're speeding your way to hell," he says. Right next to a Chick-fil-A. So we're speeding to hell. And you think, that guy thinks he's evangelizing. I'm going to check that off the list. That's all it was. That's all you're doing. When the reality is the best way that we're able to do something is what David does. David says, "You know what? I remember what God has done for me, and I'm going to be able to handle this situation just the same because of God." And Saul says, "Go. Go." And David does exactly what he does. He runs out. He takes him on. You think about yourself, the things that you've done in your life. God says, "I know what you've done, but you are mine. I'm forgive you of those sins. And I want you to understand that you are my child." That is amazing. And we need to make sure that we're telling other people about him and make sure we're doing all we can to remember what God has done for us. We do well to remember to focus on Jesus. This is the passage we looked at this morning about Peter walking on water. And as soon as he takes his eyes off of Jesus, he begins to sink. We do well to remember what God has done for us. And we do well to remember to tell other people about it. The religious world, a lot of times, we've allowed people to steal words from us, or from the Bible. Like testify, testimony. People don't like to use those words. They're in the Bible. We need to testify. You need to tell people your testimony. We need to tell people what God has done for us. Let me tell you, the way that you're able to help people that are caught up in various sins is by showing them this relationship that they can have with God. That's what changes people. When David goes out and takes on Goliath, what changes people is that they see God and they go. And they're going to follow David. It is amazing the difference of when we lead from that standpoint and let God be God and let God do what God does instead of getting in the way so often. Being God-focused. You go back to 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter. David's confidence is amazing to me. There's so many pieces of this that, again, I wish you could just dive into. It's one thing to tell your children, and you sing the song about David going out and he had a stick and some rocks, stones, and he goes out and fights. And you could talk about the weight of the spear and the weight of everything that Goliath has on, and it's just amazing. It's just ridiculous, really. The fact that David goes out with these stones is hilarious, but David didn't go out with the stones and the stick by itself. David goes out in the name of the Lord. You and I have the opportunity to do the exact same thing. David goes out, and it's so fascinating to me in verse 32 what the Philistine Goliath noticed about him. He's a youth, he's ruddy, but he's handsome. He's a handsome guy. You know what that means? We can kind of laugh at that like, wow, you notice he's handsome. What that means is he didn't look like he had ever been into a fight. He didn't have the scars and the wounds that Goliath would have had. Look at this guy. You're coming out here looking like him? You're sending him out to me? Do I look like a dog? And in verse 45, David says to the Philistine, not to Saul, not to his brother, to Goliath, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And you will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and to wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Can you imagine the laughter of the Philistines? Look at this guy. And then verse 48, "Then it happened When the Philistine rose and came and drew near David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistines. Isn't that the time you would walk? He ran. He had absolute total confidence. You know the rest of the story. David is going to kill him. But what happens, and so amazing to me, is verse 52. The men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and the gates of Ekron, and slain the Philistines lay along the way of Sharim, even the Gath and Ekron. What happened? What David does for the people is huge. The confidence was huge. They saw that David was not alone. God was with them the whole time. He would have been with Eliab. He would have been with any of them if they would have asked. And it's the same thing for us. It's the staying focused that we need to do. We must stay focused on our God. One of the fascinating things to me that David is able to do is the influence that he has on others. Whether you like it or not, you have an influence on those that are around you. I don't know that we appreciate the power of that influence that we have. We all have. When you're at worship service, you are influencing those around you. You're singing. How you partake of the Lord's Supper. You're having an influence. You're having an influence on the people at your home, your children. You're having a tremendous influence on them. You're having an impact on those that you go to school with, that you work with, everyone around you. And we could talk about those. But you're also, as I talked about this morning, having an influence on your waiter, the waitress, the people at the stores that you go to, the guy that may have cut you off. I know. You have an influence on people. You see, it's easy to shine our lights when other people are around us shining their lights. It's easy to shine our lights or be kind to people when they're kind. People in the world can be kind. They're some of the kindest people I've ever met that don't step foot in the church building. But they're only going to see God if I shine and if you shine. And we have that opportunity every minute of our life, no matter the circumstances that you find yourself in. I've been, I'll say, blessed to do a lot of funerals in my life. And I know for some, it's a difficult thing for people to get their heads wrapped around because we're so concerned about that day of our lives that we spend every other day almost denying that that's going to happen, instead of making the most of every single second that you are blessed with. Make the most of the time that you have. We waste a lot of time complaining or imagining or worrying rather than just simply living your life. There are people on deathbeds that would give anything to have the time that you have now. They're surrounded by your family, and you take them for granted. We can be spending so much time doing things that don't matter in the big scheme of things and forget about those that do matter. Make the most of the time that you have. Make sure that you're seeing and influencing those that are around you the best that you possibly can do, that you are shining as bright as you possibly can. I said this on Thursday, and I mean this with all my heart. There are people that will say the world is getting darker and darker, and all that simply means is I have the opportunity to shine brighter and brighter. You can complain about the darkness, or you can keep shining. That's the God I serve. And I hope and pray that it's the God that you serve. We're going to sing a song in just a minute about this day that is coming. And what's so fascinating to me about there's a great day coming are the other verses. For some, it's going to be a great day. I can't imagine what that day is going to be like. We can read about it. Who knows? It's just going to be so awesome. But the reality of that day, for a lot of people, it is going to be as sad as you possibly can be. Beyond what we can ever imagine. based on the choices that we make. He is a just and a merciful and a compassionate God. He has given us time. And we take that time for granted so much. You know, it's amazing to me that I'm actually doing a meeting knowing that I have 2 adults at my house, children. What happened? What happened? And when you're young and you have the children, you think, speed this up. When you're older, you just want to slow it down. Realize what you have. We spend a lot of time on tomorrows. A lot of people live in the yesterdays. You have now. You have right now. Learn from Saul. He had every opportunity to have a relationship with God. But one of the last things written about him in 1 Chronicles, the 10th chapter and verse 6 is, this Saul died with his 3 sons, and all those of his house died together. It's over because of the choices of him. Understand the consequences of the decisions that you make, including the one we all are going to make now. The invitation is always extended. I mean, certainly at any time, but we certainly have right now to make sure. We're going to sing a song, and the amazing thing about this song is it's going to explain in one of those verses what that day is going to be like for you. And that's your choice. It's going to be a great day, or it's going to be a sad day. That's your choice. Either way, that day is coming. And you must be ready. If I can help you, introduce you to my Jesus, I would love that opportunity. If you have questions, anything that I've talked about, please ask. I just want to go to heaven. That's my goal. And if you can help me out, that would be great. I would love it. And if I can help you in any way, I would love that opportunity. Please continue to pray for one another. Lean on one another. But if there's anything they can do for you right now, I ask you to please come as we stand.